Hello there, and thank you for joining the second episode of Catching a Chain. Today's episode is titled Con Air, Traveling First Class with the Federal Government. I hope you enjoy. So, excuse me, I said, can you tell me where we're going? We'd been in the air for about an hour, and I thought it was safe I could ask an innocent question. Even though we'd been given strict instructions, remain completely silent for the duration of the flight, some quiet small talk was now being allowed. No one on the flight had any idea where they were going. We were all shackled, both hands and feet. The leg shackles were then shackled to the floorboard below your seat, and each arm was chained to the shared armrest. All the windows had been permanently sealed shut, and we had been given strict instructions that if flying scared us, quote, stop being a pussy, unquote. We were now in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons and were currently being transported to destinations unknown via Con Air. There's no little bag of peanuts. There is no complimentary drink. There is no neck pillow, not even a barf bag. If you threw up, and trust me, many did, the contents of your stomach remained in your lap until the plane landed. In an incredibly weak attempt to mask the smell, the flight attendants, U.S. Marshals, would throw a towel over the person's lap who had barfed, covering the mess. It was an absolute nightmare. And again, we had no idea where we were going. So back to my innocent question. Excuse me, miss, can you tell me where I'm going? I asked one of the marshals. Of all the U.S. Marshals we had that day that were assigned to this flight crew, she seemed like she might have retained a small piece of her humanity. She hadn't been unnecessarily cruel or rude to any of the other convicts and had even managed a small smile as we experienced some turbulence during takeoff. I figured she would be my best and probably my only chance to find out what prison I was being sent to. That's how it worked with a federal prisoner transfer. For security purposes, the inmate has no idea where they're going or where they'll be transferred. You and your family are left 100% in the dark regarding your permanent destination. And with it being the federal system, they can send you anywhere in the continental United States, wherever a bed might be available, wherever you're deemed to be less of a threat, wherever they damn well please. That's where you're going. It's also quite common for the transfer to involve numerous other temporary holding prisons where you might stay weeks or even months until the next leg of your journey has been scheduled. Personally, my trip involved 4 lengthy stops before reaching my final destination. Many people don't understand the difference between a federal and a state crime, and I'll give you a quick example. If you're arrested for robbing a liquor store in California, you're going to be tried, and if you're found guilty, you're going to go to a state prison in California. You'll do your time in a prison facility in the California area. It may not be close to your home, but it'll be within those state borders. They're required to handle you. If you're arrested for robbing a federally insured bank in California, you will serve your time anywhere in any federal prison the government chooses to send you to, which could be located, again, anywhere in the United States. That's one of the big differences between those two types of crimes. Personally, at this time, although I've had, unfortunately, numerous convictions, I was convicted of possession of stolen mail. That's what I pled guilty to anyway, possession of stolen mail. And the United States mail, well, it's protected by the federal government, and hence any crime associated with the United States Postal Service falls under federal jurisdiction. My crimes had been committed in Virginia, but that meant in no way that I would serve my time there. While I was awaiting sentencing, I was allowed to post bail. This allowed me to keep my job and stay out of jail, provided I met certain requirements, submitting to random urine tests, weekly reporting to a probation officer, maintaining a full-time job, etc. Since I had already pled guilty to the charges, it was certain that I was going to prison. That was a no-brainer. But the federal pre-sentencing process is a lengthy procedure. And in my case, it took almost 10 months from the day that I pled guilty in a federal courtroom until I was returned to that same courtroom for sentencing. Excuse me. During that 10-month period, I spent as much time with my wife and son as possible. We didn't have any money, but we always found ways to have fun. We were trying to pack as much fun into that 10 months as we could. The future was uncertain, my destination was out of my hands, and we also needed to make a plan for the safety of my family while I was incarcerated. Ultimately, we decided that Fort Worth, Texas would be their new home while I did my time. My father-in-law lived there, he owned his own business, and he was willing to help us out while we were struggling. So the plan was that once I was sentenced, my wife and son would hop on a plane to Texas, paid for by my father-in-law, and they would begin their new life. Once I completed my sentence, I would then join them in Texas and we would resume our lives together. We began to research apartments and jobs in the Fort Worth, Texas area, which is where her father was located. Her father would mail us Texas newspapers and we would scour the classifieds. Again, this was 1993, long before the days of Google and online information. One day, we received yet another envelope of newspapers, but this time it was combined with some Texas maps. He thought it would be a good idea to familiarize ourselves with the area as well. This small act of kindness changed the entire course of my life. I cannot understate that enough, or overstate that enough, I guess would be the way to put it. That night, my wife and I opened up the Fort Worth, Texas map on our kitchen table. As you could expect, it was filled with references to parks, local schools, arenas, shopping malls. But right in the middle, literally almost smack dab in the center, was a federal prison. The name was FMC Fort Worth, FMC standing for Federal Medical Center. And it was a low-security federal prison used to house inmates with chronic health issues, as well as 1,000 healthy inmates who worked for Unicor, the largest federal prison industry's labor program in the world. Initially, we were stunned. The fact that a federal prison even existed in the middle of Fort Worth. Was this a sign? Were the prison gods trying to send us a message? Slowly, cautiously, a small glimmer of hope entered our hearts. Could I somehow be housed there? Could I maybe, somehow, someday, eventually request a transfer there? Could I possibly ask the sentencing judge for a recommendation that I be sent to this Texas prison? You hesitate to allow yourself to have hope during these times. Your future is in everyone else's hands. It's oftentimes not better to give yourself false hopes and just follow the bouncing ball for the time being. But to be honest, I had already gotten the sweetest sentencing deal I could ever ask for, and I was in no position to push my luck any further. You need to understand, when I was first arrested for these federal crimes, I was actually facing a sentence between 10 to 25 years in prison, and my lawyer got me 15 to 21 months in prison. I had already had 17 prior felony convictions and had only recently come to Virginia after being released from a California prison. On top of that, once I had been formally sentenced for my federal crimes and was then being extradited back to California to face additional felonies, which had recently been uncovered by detectives. So as you can see, I wasn't the best candidate for receiving favors within the judicial system. But during the 10 months I was on federal pretrial probation, I was a model citizen. Both my wife and I became somewhat friendly with my probation officer, and we felt that it would be okay to approach him with that question. Can a federal prisoner request to be housed in a certain prison? At sentencing, can a judge recommend that a defendant be housed in a particular prison? To our incredible surprise, the answers were yes. For many reasons, the federal prison system, when possible, does like to keep families together. It's good for morale, it's good for incentive, family bonding, etc. And while there are certainly no promises, they do make an effort to assist families to stay together while a family member may be incarcerated. So we did exactly that. At my formal sentencing, prior to receiving my actual sentence, my probation officer spoke on my behalf. He stated that I had not caused any problems while on bail, I was gainfully employed, and had a wife and son who I had loved to death. He asked if the judge would recommend that I serve my sentence in that Fort Worth facility, and if that could be entered into the record. The judge, I'll never forget, slowly took off his glasses, looked directly at me, and asked me a pretty simple question. He said, "I see your wife is here in the crowd today, but I don't see your son. Why isn't he here?" I immediately started to cry. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I felt so alone. I responded, I didn't know how long it would be before I would see him again, and I didn't want him to remember me this way. The judge put his glasses back on and in his best authoritative voice said, "Clerk, please enter into the record that Mr. Marble be allowed to serve his time at FMC Fort Worth, provided there is space available." Understand that right now, at this very second, there are tears in my eyes. At that time, my knees buckled. My head spun. My entire outlook changed. I had gotten a chance that I surely didn't even deserve. I had a chance to continue to be a dad to my son and be part of his life. I had a chance to dream of a future again. I had hope again, which was incredible. Now keep in mind, even though a judge had issued an order for me to be housed in Texas, it was ultimately up to the Federal Bureau of Prisons to determine my final destination. There are a number of factors used to decide where an inmate will be housed. They include the type of crime you're convicted of, any possible gang affiliations you might have, any potential enemies and or crime partners you might have in the prison system. If they determined that housing me in Texas would cause a disruption of any sort, I would be housed somewhere else. Period. And again, the inmate has no prior notification of their ultimate penitentiary home. So there I am, shackled hands and feet, inside of a 747 with absolutely no idea of our destination. When this day began, I was in a federal prison in El Reno, Oklahoma, waiting to be transferred God knows where. Since we were only temporary inmates, we had no personal items, and we were being housed in mini underground dungeons. It was July. The temperature was about 115 degrees. The humidity was about 90%. There were 10 cells, each measuring about 8 by 8, and still housing 2 to 4 men each. The stench and the grime was almost unbearable. I had already been held there 13 days, and at this point was ready to be transferred to Siberia if it got me out of this hellhole. In a book, let me explain this for you in someone else's terms. I'm actually going to quote from author Ari Ben-Menashe's book. The book is titled Prophets of War Inside the Secret U.S.-Israeli Arms Network. Okay? Now, this is a book that was written. It has nothing to do necessarily with prison itself, but it describes some of the conditions people faced during this time. So here we go. I'm quoting from the book now. Quote, "At 10 p.m., we landed in Oklahoma City. My name was called, along with the others. We were herded off to be met by more shotgun-wielding marshals." Now, again, keep in mind, this is not me. This is someone who's just going through the process, but it was identical to what we faced. I was taken to the El Reno Federal Penitentiary. This is where I was, and was led down some metal stairs to an underground cell block. You could almost touch the walls of your cell with your arms spread out. On one side was a metal bunk bed. Someone had spilled some sugar on it, and it was crawling with cockroaches. The concrete floor was wet. In the corner was an aluminum toilet with a sink attached. The toilet worked. The sink didn't. They kept me there for 2 days in what I later learned was among the worst prison conditions in the United States. It was illegal to hold anyone that long without allowing them out for exercise. They didn't care. I had been marked as dangerous, and that was that. Those exact cells I was in for 13 days, waiting to be moved on. Never allowed outside, always with at least one or more cellmates. In stifling, oppressive heat, there was no television, there was no radio, there was reading materials from 1961 or something like that. If you wanted, Bibles had pages ripped out that were used as rolling papers. There were Reader's Digest, like I mentioned, and there was one, this is what I remember vividly. There was one fan for the entire cell block. One fan for all the men in about 115 degree heat. One fan. So many of you can imagine my delight when I was awakened by the sound of my name being called and the instruction to roll up. Roll up means to gather your belongings. You're being sent somewhere. 2 hours later, we arrived at a private airstrip in Oklahoma City. Suddenly, our van was rolling up to a 747 jet, which was completely surrounded by armed U.S. Marshals. There were numerous SWAT team members and snipers holding enough firepower to start a small war. We were quickly shuffled off the van for one more quick pat-down search and then hurriedly loaded into the airplane. There was absolutely no talking allowed on the plane. The marshals were kind enough to demonstrate the facial restraint mask, which would be slapped on your head just in case you decided to get a little bit chatty. We were all shackled to the floor, shackled to the waist, and off we went into the unknown, literally. So back to the beginning of this story. We had been airborne for about an hour. Things had been quiet. No one had gotten to enjoy the facial restraint mask yet. I decided it was safe to make my move. I asked the young U.S. Marshal that simple question. "Excuse me, miss, could you tell me where I'm going?" She pulled a multi-sheet roll of papers out of her military-style khaki pants. My heart started to beat a little harder, I've got to be honest. My mouth got a little dry. She began to look at her list. She asked, "Confirm your name?" Somehow I managed the word and went back to holding my breath. She said Fort Worth, Texas, and walked off. She just walked off. In my head, I am screaming, "Come back here, lady. I want to hug you. I want to kiss you. I want to high five. I want to chest bump. I want to butterfly kiss you all at once." Thankfully for all of us, she continued to walk away. But then the true emotions hit me. I really just wanted to cry. I was just given the biggest gift of my entire life. I was truly emotional, but there is one thing I can assure you. Shackled on an airplane with some of this nation's worst criminals is not the time you want to well up with tears or discuss your deepest emotions. So I just sat there with newfound electricity and hope coursing through my veins. To be honest, I probably looked like a cat who just ate a canary because I couldn't stop smiling. That's my story. That's my Con Air story about how I ended up going to a federal prison in in Texas, in Fort Worth, Texas. There'll be many more stories to come. If you enjoyed that one, please come back. I'll have another one real soon. I do plan to jump around just a little bit, so I hope you bear with me. This is all new, but I'm just going to throw some things at the wall, as they say, and let's see what sticks. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.